Are we expecting everybody, Jill?
We are expecting, if Chris just loaded in, got in.
Oh, so we have the board.
We have our board. Chris and Ellen were on a TIF meeting. I've got expecting.
No, we were on a legislative session meeting. That's why we're on a TIF.
We have the board.
We have our board. Chris and Ellen were on a TIF meeting. I've got expecting.
Jill, we have an echo from your.
Yeah.
It's the Zoom. Hold on. Is that better?
Yeah. I wished if Chris and Ellen were on a TIF meeting, we were on a legislature meeting for 2 hours. I expect this board meeting to be uplifting in comparison.
I have a John Dennison.
That's Jed Dennison. He's the property manager for MRL Properties.
Okay, I'm going to elevate him to a participant so he can present.
Perfect.
Elevated.
Hello.
You've been elevated. Are we ready?
I think so, unless we're waiting for Chris.
Hear him talking. He's still doing the legislative stuff.
Okay.
So let's
And I
just
know that Melanie.
Mel's
There
here.
she is, all souped up. So we ready?
Jed.
Okay.
All right, well, we'll call the meeting to order. It's Thursday, December 17th. It's noon, and this is the regular monthly meeting of the Missoula Redevelopment Agency. Anyone who's listening in, we do public comments. We'll have opportunities for general public comments at the beginning of our agenda. We have public comments on action items at the time we take up the action items. Joe or someone will put numbers up on the board for people to call in to make comments. But with that, I think the meeting's being recorded. All the board members are present. I don't think we need to do introductions. So the first item of business is approval of the November 19th regular board minutes. Everybody have a chance to see them? Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, is there someone want to make a motion? Oh,
This is
Ruth?
no additions or corrections. I was just going to say this is Ruth, and I will move to approve the minutes.
Okay. Somebody want to second that?
This is Nancy, I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? None. Are there any public comments or announcements within matters within the board's jurisdiction? We'll leave the phone lines open, that's up on the screen, the numbers you can call. Leave those open for a minute or so to make sure anyone that wants to call in can do so. In the meantime, Ellen or anybody, any announcements from the staff?
Just to Jill, if Aaron Wilson shows up, please elevate him to participant because he'll be doing the presentation on the long range transportation plan.
Okay. Well, that was a heck of an announcement.
Housekeeping.
So I elevated Aaron. You should see him.
Okay,
I also have somebody from Nelson Nygaard in Seattle. Is that a person
Great.
that needs to be elevated to a panelist?
Yes, please.
And does that person have a name?
Jennifer.
no, that person doesn't have a name. They go by no name.
He chooses to remain anonymous.
Right. Okay, Jill, anybody else? Anybody calling in for general public comments?
Nope, nobody's raising their hand. The other person that's in the meeting as an attendee is David Erickson from the Missoulian.
All right,
And John
Well,
Adams. is the
then.
same.
let's move to the action item agenda. And Joe, I'd sure like it if we didn't share the agenda screen. Makes it hard to see who's talking.
Okay, actually, so
And Annette, I think you're up.
I'm up. Okay. So right up front, there will be some acronyms and some, I don't know, maybe level of complexity to this project that I will do my very best to get through. John Adams, who's with the city's, I'm not sure exactly what the name of his department, well, he's in the community planning and community planning, development and innovation department, but he administers the grants for the city. He needs to call into this meeting, so I'm hoping that he will be a part of the meeting. And then we have Tyler Etzel and maybe Mike Smith from WGM Group joining us as well. So I'm just briefly going to share my screen to indicate if that's going to happen, the property that we're talking about. It's the MRL. We're, for lack of a better name, which will come at some point, we're referring to it as the MRL property. It's the entire property that's bounded by North Avenue, Johnson Street, the tip at South Avenue, and then along the Bitterroot Branch Railroad. And as the board will recall, the city purchased this property in 2017, and it allowed us to build, that purchase allowed us to construct Montana Rail Link Park at the south end of the property and construct the Bitterroot, the last remaining piece of the Bitterroot Branch Trail along the east edge. The entire property is listed on the state Superfund site through the state DEQ. And it was listed in the mid-90s, and MRL, the property owner at the time, did clean up. It was mostly because of lead impacted soils. They did clean up, but they did not go through the delisting process. And as anybody who has gone through the delisting process knows, it's a long process, a somewhat complicated process that takes time and back and forth with the DEQ. We were able to, when we constructed the park, we did find some soil that through the phase 1 and phase 2 EAs that the city did for due diligence to purchase the property. We knew that there were elevated levels of lead in the park site, and as part of the park construction, we did remediation, and some soil was taken off site and some soil was kept on site, capped under the tennis courts. So now the city is in a position to begin looking at developing the northern part of the site for housing and mixed use development. And in order to access any federal funding with regard to that sort of development, the site needs to be delisted as a Superfund site. So the city has, through John's office, has started that process. And as I outlined in my memo, there's a lot of uncertainty at the beginning of the delisting process, because you don't know, even though we've gone through the phase 1 and phase 2 assessment for due diligence, you don't know upfront what DEQ is going to request with regard to the amount of testing. And then once you start that testing, you might find things that require more exploration, more testing, more analysis. John's office had about $240,000 in an environmental assessment grant, a brownfields assessment grant. And so decided to get started on the process, and went through an RFQ process to select a consultant to work with DEQ on the process. The fee was not known definitively what that would cost. And so it was decided to sort of do it one bite at a time. And so WGM has gone through they're into the, so it's a cleanup through DEQ, going through a voluntary cleanup plan, and it's broken into 2 pieces: an environmental analysis piece, which is really the most uncertain piece. That's the one where you lay out how you're going to do the testing and the remediation. And once that's all accepted by DEQ, then can go into the voluntary cleanup plan, remediation plan. So we're in the environmental analysis phase, getting toward the end of that. And the good news is that DEQ or WGM has not uncovered any surprises. They did, not surprisingly, discover some asbestos in what had been the Sovereign Hope Church, and some in the Camp Make a Dream building. Those are both in a friable form, which means it's a inert form unless it's disturbed. So when those buildings are removed or rehabbed, probably removed, then the asbestos would need to be addressed, but it's in an inert form that is safe at the moment. There still is some testing that needs to be done to finalize some testing analysis and just the final writing of the environmental analysis before it can be completed. And that amount of work, we're now aware, is exceeding the amount of funding that is available in the grant. And so we're requesting additional funding from the board to complete that environmental analysis. And then once the environmental analysis is complete, we'll be in a better position to know what a remediation cost would be. And then we're proposing to come back to the board to request balance of funding for that. As I explained in my memo, the grants office has obtained a brownfields remediation grant, and that comes with a 17% match. And so staff would like to recommend requesting that match from the board when we know exactly what that amount will be. So with that, if John is here. I'll turn it over to John if he's been able to connect to add anything that I may have overlooked, and then just open it up for questions. There's John. Good.
This is John. I've called in. I don't have anything to add, Annette. I think you've done a great job of summing things up, but I'm available for any questions.
Okay, great.
Okay. Thank you, Annette. Thank you, John. Thank you both. Questions from anyone? So if the, so I have a question. I take it that there's certain costs in developing a plan, even if the additional testing comes up negative. Is that right?
That's correct. So you still need to get, so there's two costs, I mean, for sure. One is the asbestos abatement. And then the second is completing, even if you found absolutely nothing, you still have to write a no further action remediation plan and get DEQ's agreement that you've adequately demonstrated that there are no potential hazards at the site. So they're much less, the less stuff we find, the less expensive it'll be to remediate, but there's still some fixed costs to getting it delisted.
And would the asbestos, does that have to be addressed now, or does that have to be addressed when the building is rehabbed or demolished?
We're probably going to be able to decouple that from delisting. I can't say that for sure. Tyler might know better. But no, our constraint on the asbestos is basically going to be, you have to do it before you demolish the buildings. And we have to do it, if we want to use our EPA grant to do it, we have to do it within the lifetime of the grant, which is 3 years. So, presumably we would be moving way before that. But no, we don't have to, do the asbestos tomorrow or next week or next month. We need to fit that into our broader plans for redevelopment of the site.
And I will just add that the one thing that is holding up, if you will, the redevelopment of this property is the environmental process that we're going through. So presumably, as soon as we get through that process successfully, we'll be in a position to look at how we're going to redevelop that site and deconstruct buildings and do the things that go along with that. Sorry.
Mel?
I was just looking for some historical perspective. Have we run into this before where we had to enter into a voluntary plan?
This is John. This board has done yeoman's work working through a voluntary cleanup plan at the Missoula sawmill. And then we also have been kind of observers we sat at the side and observed at White Pine Sash, which is, I can't remember if they're voluntary or not, but they're going through a cleanup process that's very similar, also sponsored by DEQ. So we have seen this on more expensive and more complicated sites.
Nancy?
Does this request cover the property that's also part of Ellen's request for the building deconstruction, 1835 North Avenue?
It does, but no contaminants have been identified in the buildings that we're asking to go ahead and deconstruct now.
So it's not necessary that this be completed before the deconstruction takes place?
Jump in there, John.
Yeah, that's correct. We shouldn't have to do anything more for Ellen's request. We've got the green light.
Thank you.
So, John, just curious, you got the green light from DEQ, or are you saying that because nothing was found, you feel like you have the green light?
The latter. For the site isn't under order from DEQ, so you wouldn't have to typically ask them permission to do stuff, even though you've got to be sure you don't screw anything up. So you'd just be in the usual state asbestos remediation or asbestos survey program requirements. We're basically, it's been a while since I looked at these, but basically if you're going to demolish anything of size, you have to do an asbestos survey to make sure you're not making friable, non-friable asbestos and distributing it into the air and soil. And so as part of under the assessment grant, as part of our work on the EA VCP, we've already done all that asbestos testing, and we have the results to demonstrate that there's nothing there. So that should suffice for the typical state process.
Yeah, Nancy, you want to follow up?
Then do the buildings need to be deconstructed before the remediation plan? The buildings of the second request, they need to be deconstructed before the remediation plan for the first request can be completed, because then there's soil exposed to be tested.
They should be unrelated. There's always the possibility that DEQ will ask us to look under buildings once we start demolishing them. It's one of the kind of things that could crop up, but they're not requiring us to demolish in order to do sampling. So the two requests, Ellen's and Annette's, they're related only by proximity, not really by, they're not related in any other obvious way.
Thank you.
Ruth, did you have something?
I did have a question. The letter from DEQ that was attached to Ellen's memo, what part of these work orders have they approved already?
So if you're referring to the work orders that Annette attached to her memo.
Yes, but I'm sorry, yes, but there was also a letter from DEQ that.
Oh, is that the sampling and analysis plan?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the SAP, the sampling and analysis plan, was approved by DEQ and by EPA. EPA is required to approve it under the terms of our EPA grant. DEQ approved it as a courtesy, essentially signaling that they thought that this was a good quality plan that would yield high quality results. So they're not promising that this is everything that we could possibly ask of you. That's dependent on the results. But it signals that DEQ is on board. I should mention that DEQ has worked really well and collaboratively with us on this project. They've been just excellent to work with and have been trying to help us get to a happy conclusion really assiduously.
So they've approved the sampling and analysis plan, and they still have to approve it after we get the final results. Then they have to approve that before we can do the delisting.
Yeah. So, for example, I'm pulling an example out of my deep memory. It may be inaccurate, but I think that they required us to test for dioxin a little bit because there had been some milling on site, and so they wanted to make sure that there wasn't wood treatment there that could be a problem. So they approve a sampling and analysis plan that we all agree would give us a good indication of whether there was a dioxin problem. So we get the results back, and let's assume that they're negative. There is no indication of dioxin. WGM still has to write up the report, demonstrate that there was chain of custody of the samples, that the analysis was done appropriately, and essentially provide the argument that this provides the evidence we need that there is no dioxin problem and we can move on. And then DEQ responds to that and says either, yes, you've persuaded us, great, you're done with this, or we still have some questions and we can talk about that, or we might require more sampling, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yes. So the funds that are being requested today are to complete that, is for WGM to complete that report. And
exactly.
But at this point, we're assuming that we won't find any dioxin or other further problems. And if we do, then our little hedge in there of 10,000 should cover that. Am I understanding this correctly?
Yeah, pretty much. I I can't tell you conclusively that we haven't found anything, that there are no soil issues at all, but I know that WGM has been really bullish on it, that they don't think that there are any big problems, but there might still be stuff we have to discuss with WGM. And you're exactly right. That's why the contingency is to just, if DEQ says that, that's not quite enough, we need a little bit more, or it just takes more back and forth with them than we anticipate, we wanted to avoid having to come back and ask you for further assistance.
Okay, so this is really just to complete the report, and then plus any additional reporting that might need to be done based on the samples. And then there will be a second report later regarding remediation. So this is just—
That's exactly right.
assessment.
Yeah, the EAVCP, the environmental assessment, is essentially defines the problem or the scale of any problems,
yeah.
and then the remediation plan that attempts to address them.
Right. Before I yield the floor, I'd like to thank Annette, because I do think that you did a really good job of summarizing this in your statements today, because it is a pretty complicated set of documents that were attached to this. Thank you.
Anything else from anybody? I mean, Annette, this proves the good job you did, because we could be spending hours going through the details of this. But, all right, if not, is there a motion?
This is
Oh, maybe you didn't do such a good job in that. Oh, there we go.
This is Ruth. I'll move to approve an amount not to exceed $36,000 in TIP funds to supplement the Brownfields Assessment Grant funds to complete a Montana DEQ voluntary cleanup plan environmental assessment for the Montana Rail Link property located at 1930 South Avenue as the first step in delisting the property from the Montana State Superfund list, and enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Community Planning, Development and Innovation, I guess, to complete the work.
There a second?
This is Melanie. I'll second it.
Okay. Is there, oh, Jill, we need to put up the numbers, please.
I can share my screen, Carl, and put those numbers back up.
Sure.
Marty said that they actually are not, since there's so many ways that the public can participate, they're not doing that for very long these days, just FYI.
Okay, that's good. So when you do that, we'll have a minute or two of awkward silence, but is there any other public comments or any other comments from anybody online right now? And we'll give it a minute or two here for any public comments. Ruth?
So I just have a question. Maybe if somebody from WGM is on the line, because I wasn't here when they were doing the bulk of the cleanup on the sawmill site, but it occurs to me that there were some work orders that had some really pretty big size change orders, and I'm wondering if that's typical when you have a $74,000 work order that has a $98,000 change order, for example. Is that typical?
This is John. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, yeah, John.
So if Tyler's on, he may also want to provide a response, but the way that we cut this up was just that we simply started in on the job. And so the change orders reflected more kind of what is this chunk taking, and then trying to think, as we'd move along, we'd become a little bit more clear about, well, here's what we can accomplish at this point. So in my view, it wasn't problematic. It was simply an outgrowth of the process that you don't know until you start in on it, exactly what's going to happen, what you're going to find in either the historical records or once you start sampling in the samples. So it was just so you know, from my perspective as the person who is administering the contract, I thought it was totally typical and normal.
Okay, and I noticed that, for example, one of those change orders jumped from like 35 soil samples to 400 soil samples. And, you know, so it is explainable. I just, you know, just on paper, it looks like a lot. You know, in fact, I did have another question then for, probably for, and this isn't going to change my vote, but for WGM, when one of those change orders mentioned that they were going to be doing the subcontractor management, like for the drilling and the lab management, the field prep and all that, and also mentioned community relations. And I'm curious about what was involved with that, just the contiguous landowners, or what was involved with community relations?
Yeah, this is Tyler Etzel with WGM. The community relations involved the adjacent property owners and contacting them, getting their permission to actually collect samples on the adjacent properties to this site. That's one of the requirements under a voluntary cleanup plan, is to contact as many adjacent property owners as you can and get written permission from them to collect actual physical samples from their property. Also, we did a little work with John on some community presentation of the plan for this site. I'm not sure, that was probably not involved in this current work order that we're doing, but we were doing that previous to this current one, I believe. Isn't that correct, John?
Yep, that was a separate work order under separate contract.
Yeah. But, you know, these voluntary cleanup plans they're kind of like a shot in the dark when it comes to predicting how much it's going to cost, because it all depends on what the DEQ, what changes they make to what you think you have to do. So you go to a site and you think you need to do X amount of samples to do the assessment. Then you submit your plan to DEQ and they say, oh no, we want you to address this and we want you to address that. And so it's kind of a, you know, like I said, a shot in the dark on how much things are going to cost. So
Yeah, understood.
yeah.
And that's always, you know, because it's the same project, then it's always a change order. And I lost track of how many we had to do on Silver Park. I mean, there was change orders, and then there were change orders to change orders and change orders to change orders to change orders. And it's just, you know, once you start poking holes and digging in the dirt, and you find stuff that has to be dealt with.
Yeah, I will say for this particular property, because in particular for the northern portion of the site, which we've been dealing with, we've really not found any significant problems that would indicate we're going to have to do a bunch more assessment work, or even really any significant. That's what our thought is right now.
Okay, and just to be clear, the listing is just for this MRL property, and even though you're required to take samples from adjacent property owners, any remediation plan is strictly for this property.
That's correct.
Ellen, did you have something to add?
Well, just to try to make this a little clearer, I think the term change order, I think it could be a little bit misleading here, because I think the way we approach this, as we would most environmental assessment projects, is it's almost done in what we commonly refer to as phases, to try to be as efficient and as cautious with the funding as we can be. So as you get one phase done, that identifies what might need to happen in the next phase. A change order in our world typically is you've got a bid. It says we're going to do this whole project for X dollars, and then you find something you didn't anticipate. So it's a change order that you had not, it's a change that you had not been able to anticipate. We've structured this, or John has structured this, in a way that lets us spend the money that we have available as efficiently as possible. And John, if I said that wrong, correct me, but I think we think of change orders as uh-oh, and I don't think these are uh-ohs.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in some cases, it was responding to opportunity. So, for example, when we went to do a big sampling session this late summer or early fall, initially we had planned that it would be the second of 3 rounds, and WGM essentially decided or argued along the way, wait a minute, I think we can get all the things we're going to need in one fell swoop. Let's just compress it and do it now. And so then to do that, then you have to do more sampling, like you have to add a bunch of costs, but you're saving money. It's becoming more efficient and getting us done more quickly.
Okay, anything else?
Thank you.
Anything else? And Joe, I take it there's no one in line wanting to publicly comment publicly?
No, there is not.
All right. If there's nothing else, then all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None? Thank you all for great work and a great presentation of a complicated subject. MRO property building deconstruction. Alan.
Yeah, I guess this action item today is all about the MRL property.
It is.
Yeah, so it seems. So you might remember that when the city purchased this roughly 12 acres from Montana Rail Link, there were 3 tenants on the property. One was Can't Make a Dream, which is still there. One was Sheck, which is the church that has moved off of the property. And then the third was GTS Interior, which was a drywall interior materials supplier. And they vacated the property, I think, in 2018. The buildings that GTS had formerly occupied have been vacant since they moved out. We fenced that area, and MRA continues to lease fencing, which is around there. But one of the issues that we have encountered is that we've got folks getting in there and into those buildings who don't have any business being there, and a couple of the buildings represent a liability to the city because of the condition they're in. City hired a property manager in the form of Jed Dennison, who's with us today with Zill Estate, to manage not only the properties on the MRL land that we bought, but also the old library building that's that Terry Payne donated to the city a year or two ago. And so he's been trying to manage this situation with the vacant buildings that were formerly occupied by GTS. He's came to us and recommended that we take down, remove 2 of those buildings. One is a shed that is dilapidated and represents a liability. The other is a warehouse building that is also in bad condition. All of these will be removed eventually. And we recently had a transient who was living in that building, and once we discovered that there were a number of issues associated with it, we're able to vacate that person. And I think we've got compromised areas around the fencing. So Jed's recommendation is that we take those buildings down. The other major building on the site will be leased. He's found a tenant for that, so it will be occupied, I think, starting shortly after the first of the year. So that will put presence on that property and eyes on the site that we haven't had. Per MRA's policies, we are requiring that the buildings be deconstructed, the 2 that we're recommending to be taken down. And there are some really salvageable materials in those, the age, et cetera. There's some timbers and some materials that are desirable and can be reused in the community. Jed, as property manager, got 3 quotes to do this work. We had not received all of the quotes by the time your agenda went out, and I sent out a supplement to the agenda item this morning indicating that Heritage Timber was the low quote that met all the specifications that we're looking for. Their price was $24,800, if I remember correctly. And the recommendation is that the board approve, allowed or direct Jed or Zilla State to enter into a contract with Heritage Timber in an amount not to exceed the $24,800 to deconstruct and remove the materials in those 2 buildings from the property owned by the city. Jed's here to answer any questions you might have, and I believe Becky is on the line from Heritage Timber. If you have any questions of them. I think that one of the comments they made in their response to the proposal was that there were a number of valuable materials that they could extract from the building and could be reused in the community very easily. So our policy stands good again.
Jed, do you have anything to add?
I think Ellen summed it up very well. I think it is the way the buildings are right now, and we're doing our best to keep the property as secure as possible, but people are still finding their way in, and I do think it is a liability for the city, and that's why we came with a recommendation to have these 2 structures deconstructed. I will say with the tenant coming into the old GTS building, that it will also help with activity and eyes on the property. But even with this tenant coming in after the beginning of the year, it would still be our recommendation to deconstruct both these structures.
Okay. So Ellen, we've got this air photo that you submitted with your memo
Yes.
that I've blown up. I just want to make, so I think I can do this.
Well, if you can, you're better off than I am, because when I have to switch servers, I can't move. I don't seem to be able to move things from one.
So where are we here on this?
The 2 red demarcations. One is a shed to the north, and one is a warehouse building, the larger one.
Okay. And Jed, where's the tenant going?
You just had your cursor on where the tenant is going, so it would be on the
Here?
eastern, no, to the east, right there, correct.
Okay. And theirs can't make a dream, is that right?
That's correct.
That is correct.
And what's labeled as Sudden Victory Wrestling Academy is what was SHEC, which is Sovereign Hope Evangelical Church, and is now the city and county's temporary emergency winter shelter.
So the Sudden Victory Wrestle, I don't wrestle much. It's no longer a wrestling academy?
No, that was the church. I mean, they leased out some of their, historically leased out some of their gymnasium space in those buildings to various functions, and I think the Wrestling Academy was one of them.
Okay.
So they must have paid Google to get their name on the map. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Aren't you all impressed with my ability to share my screen?
Could
Yeah.
you do a tutorial for
That's what 16 hours of hearings for the last 2 days will do. You get to learn how to share your screen. Okay, any other questions? And the Heritage Timber folks are on the line?
I am. This is Becky.
Hi, Becky. And what's salvageable? Is there cool stuff in there?
Let me get video so I'm just not this random voice. So yeah, there's a lot of recoverable material. So anything from the roof sheathing to the metal roofing to the siding. So our goal is always the highest retention possible. Anything that we can't pull out of there that's reusable, we'll recycle. So we'll take advantage of Garden City composting for any clean wood that we can't reuse, and we'll take advantage of Johnson Brothers, recycling for metals. So we go for the highest rate, and because these aren't really improved buildings, sorry, I'm so dark on the screen, because they're not really improved, it increases our retention capacity. So we're not having to deal with sheetrock and all of that sort of stuff. So they're pretty straightforward buildings. I think the only concern for us would be any bit of if we get a lot of snow, of which it's doing right now outside. But we do generally work through the winter, but that's just something that if folks decide to go through, it's just something that we need to figure out and get more details on. But otherwise, very recoverable. I wouldn't say very high value material, but definitely reusable. So that's key. And we don't knock the buildings over and then see what we can salvage. We actually take them down by hand, and we'll reuse everything from wood and metal roofing to also nails and bolts and industrial hardware. So really, I think we have probably the highest rates in the industry. So I think it'll be a fun project, and we can easily track that if that's something that MRA would be interested in.
Okay. Thank you. Anything further from anybody? Jill, you put our numbers back up because I think we're going to get a motion here. And
Okay.
I'm happy to make the motion, Carl.
thank you, Tasha. Is
So
there
I'll
a second? Oh, go ahead.
I'll move the board authorize Zill Estate to enter into a contract with Heritage Timber to deconstruct the two identified structures located at 1835 North Avenue and approve funding in an amount not to exceed $24,800 to complete the contract.
Okay. And is there a second? Nancy seconded. And if Joe can put the numbers up, we can give people a minute to see. Otherwise, kind of a cool project. Ruth, you go by the park a lot. Is it still used a lot?
Pardon, what was that question?
Don't you go by that park a lot? Don't you go by that park a lot? The MRL park?
I wouldn't say a lot.
Oh, okay.
And so what was the question?
I haven't been out in that direction for a while. So is it the park still being heavily used?
I don't know. I'm going to say, yeah, I don't know, but I don't know.
Okay.
I think the dog park continues to be very heavily used. Obviously, with the weather and winter upon us, the rest of the park not as heavily as it was during the summer, and some of the things like picnic tables, et cetera, have been taken out, but it is a really popular park. And the Garden City Harvest part of it was a huge success this summer.
Okay. Joe, anybody waiting to comment?
Nope. We don't
If
have any
not-
callers waiting to comment.
If not, all in favor of the motion, or I guess any other comments from any of the board members or anybody present? If not, then all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None? Jed?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, and we'll get going on this.
Get her done. Thank you.
All right. Thank you
All
for everybody.
right, non-action items, the long-range transportation plan update. Ellen.
Yeah, I'm not going to say much about this. Aaron Wilson is with us to present the plan. We have Jennifer Whelan from Nelson Nygaard in the meeting as well. I think Aaron has a 1 o'clock or something shortly after 1 that he needs to be at, and as usual, I did not estimate time well. So I'm going to turn this over to Aaron.
Thanks, Ellen. And yeah, I can run a little late, so I'll help get through this presentation. And if there are any specific comments as we're going through it, feel free to chime in with those questions. And then I might jump off early, but I think Jennifer can stick around for a little bit longer if there's, and Ellen has seen this presentation enough times now, she could probably give it herself. And so she's more than capable of weighing in as well. So we'll go through the presentation here as efficiently as possible to try to cover ground and give enough detail, but then focus on some discussion on how this relates to the Missoula Redevelopment Agency and the urban renewal districts. So we're talking and presenting about our long-range transportation plan update, which is something the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, does every 4 years. We do an update to this long-range transportation plan, which sounds like a lot, and it kind of is. It feels like we roll right from one update to the other, but it also allows us to really be responsive to changing conditions and making sure that our transportation investments and strategies are matching what's happening in Missoula and shifting with other plans and priorities. So we're kind of mid-process right now. We've done a lot of work up to this date. Just a quick summary on this slide, but we've been working on existing conditions reviews. We've been working with the community and various stakeholders on revising and updating our goals and outcomes, as I mentioned, trying to get this transportation plan's goals in alignment with the other work that's happening around the city, including affordable housing and work that all of you are doing in urban renewal districts and growth policies and all of that various work. We've also been collecting projects and transportation needs, putting those into lists, and where we are at now is developing some scenarios to help us evaluate trade-offs and weigh some different decisions that we might have to make given limited funding. So that's the bulk of what we're going to present, but there's a lot of other work that's led up to this and that we'll be doing in terms of developing programs and implementation recommendations sort of as we complete the plan draft. So just want to quickly go over the goals that I mentioned we've been working on refining and developing. And I think we have really gotten good feedback and been able to take what was previously 8 or 9 goals with a whole set of sub goals and objectives and refine those into 5 kind of key ideas that we want to carry through all of the work that we're doing in the transportation plan. And so this will form the foundation of everything that we'll present and the analysis that we're doing in terms of our scenarios and just thinking about what we want to achieve with this plan. But ultimately, those goals, just in a brief summary, are improving safety and promoting public health, knowing that people want a transportation system that is safe and that they feel comfortable and that helps people live active, healthy lifestyles. We also want to advance sustainability and community resilience. That's both from a climate, but also economic sustainability and resilience of our community to adapt to sort of increasingly rapid change that we experience in all aspects of the community. We also want to expand mobility choices. This is sort of fundamental to what we're doing in transportation. It's helping to meet those mode split goals that we adopted in the last plan, and just providing people with diverse, affordable transportation options throughout the region. And then we want to connect communities to create a more equitable region. So again, focusing on that equity piece that's so important in all the work that we're doing across planning and how our community is growing. And then finally, we want to make sure we're making investments strategically that help boost our ability to grow and our economy to keep up with the growth that we're seeing in the region. So movement of people and goods and access to jobs. So those are the 5 key goals that are underlying all of the work that we are going to present through this presentation.
Great. And I'll grab it from here, Aaron, for a minute. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So just to give you all a quick look at where we are in terms of taking 200 plus projects and programs and shaping them into the scenarios we'll share with you today, we put this graphic together to sort of describe what that process has looked like. And over the course of the summer, we did invite public input on projects and programs. We pulled them from all of the cities and counties and MPOs' past work, and then worked with our Citizens Advisory Committee and our Technical Advisory Committee to really build that out. we've used the goals that Erin just described then to score the projects and pulled those that really do the most in terms of moving us toward our goals and shaped them into 3 scenarios. And that's what we're going to talk about today. From here, we will move into developing a recommended scenario and a recommended list of projects. And there's a couple important things to know about that. One is that we don't necessarily anticipate that we will choose one of the 3 scenarios we're going to share with you today. We expect there'll be a little bit of mixing and matching. And while the prioritized project list is something that is a requirement of the long-range transportation plan, it's also really important to know that that doesn't preclude us from being opportunistic. One of the things that we do in the long-range plan is include a very broad list of projects beyond those for which funding might be available. And that gives us a lot of flexibility if an opportunity arises, if there's a partnership, if there's a project we can leverage, if there's new funding. That's a really important way that we can move projects forward. And I think specifically for the MRA and the funding that you sometimes have available, it's important to think about that leveraging opportunity as part of this process. So the evaluation process doesn't cut off those opportunities, but it does help to point us to the projects that do the most to advance our goals. And part of the reason that we do this scenario planning is to be able to explore a few different things. While this is a transportation plan, we have looked a little bit at some growth scenarios, as Erin mentioned. And part of that is being able to really help articulate the relationship between land use and transportation. It's something that we all know, but to really be able to test the ways that different growth scenarios improve transportation investments and vice versa has been an important part of what we're trying to do here. And then I think first and foremost, what scenario planning helps us do is illustrate trade-offs. It's a way to combine different types of projects and show the value that we can get out of combining them in different ways to try and advance the region's goals. So that's part of the reason we've gone through this point in the process. I'll just quickly mention the 2 growth scenarios that we've used. And again, because we don't have, the long-range transportation plan doesn't direct growth in the region, we are not a land use plan, we are working within the cities and counties' current land use and growth policies. And you as a city, you as a region do have really progressive land use policies. And so even thinking about business as usual, which is growth occurring where it is planned, where there is capacity to absorb it, is not a bad land use strategy. But what we've tried to test through the long range plan is what might happen if we targeted growth in specific areas. So particularly, we've really looked at the ways that we might direct growth or maximize the capacity that is in some of the areas where investments have been made. So a little bit more of an inward focus to that growth. And what that has meant is that in the strategic growth scenario, we've looked at increasing the number of households that would be in the Mullen area to match the newly approved master plan. We've also looked at shifting some growth to the Brooks Corridor, to Central and the Russell to Reserve areas, and moving a little bit of growth away from some of the outer areas of the region, including Grant Creek, Miller Creek, and Target Range, just for a couple of examples. So you'll see these growth scenarios come up when we start to talk about the results of our evaluation. But again, it really is that focus inward that we were trying to test. So we created, to go with those 2 growth approaches, we created 3 different transportation scenarios. And we're going to just introduce these really quickly because we do want to spend some time looking at projects that we have included that are in the URDs. So the 3 transportation scenarios are new connections, enhanced connections, and regional equity. And in developing these 3, again, they are a mix of projects and programs. All 3 are multimodal, and that means they all include projects for every mode of transportation, whether you're walking, biking, driving, or taking the bus. They also try and combine those improvements in different ways to get different outcomes. And so this is where that sort of trade-off exercise and the testing comes into play. One important thing to note, and that Erin and I really wanted to mention, is that each of these scenarios has the same amount of revenue assumed. So they have different numbers of projects, but we assume the same amount of dollars. And certainly in terms of funds that this board has jurisdiction over, TIF funding is one of our primary sources of local funds when we think about how to move some of these projects forward. And Aaron, I think you were going to give a couple examples of how you've used TIF funds for that in the past.
Yeah, and this none of these will be a surprise to this board, but just to reiterate that a lot of infrastructure comes out of our urban renewal districts and those investments. So things like connecting Mary Avenue through the mall, or the Reserve Street bike ped bridge that made that last connection for the Bitterroot Trail and created that grade separated crossing. So some really high profile kind of marquee transportation connection projects have been funded through TIF, and I expect will continue to be funded. And so we really wanted to think about how those fit into our overall transportation plan. And so we essentially estimated what funding we might have available over the next 30 years based on the last 5 or 10 years of investment. So just it's an estimate, but we did really want to think about how TIF funds can be leveraged to complete some of these projects.
Great, thanks, Aaron. So then just to quickly introduce each of these scenarios, the first of the three is one that we call new connections. And the new connections scenario does focus on ways that we can expand the networks that exist today. So there are some new roadway or new street projects that are complete streets. And so that includes improvements for all modes of transportation, as well as some signature projects for new trails and new bridges. And just a couple that I'll call your attention to. This scenario includes the Russell Street extension to I-90. This is the most expensive project that is included in any of the scenarios. And that's part of the reason that you don't see too many projects included in new connections. These are big projects. They are transformative projects in some ways, and also expensive. So one other example of a project included here is the Riverfront Triangle non-motorized bridge, which is a key connection between downtown and McCormick Park. But again, as you all know, when we talk about new bridges, those are expensive pieces of infrastructure. So that's new connections. On the other end of the spectrum, we have enhanced connections. And so rather than creating a lot of new large projects, this scenario focuses on how do we maintain and improve the networks that exist. We also really focused on connections to some of the investments the region is already making. And a good example of that are these two projects right here, which are the England Boulevard and Union Pacific to Palmer bike lanes. And we added these projects to really think about the connections to the investments being made in the Mullen area through the Build Grant. So thinking about how do we start to knit together projects that are already on the books or that are underway and close gaps and really complete some of the investments that are happening across the region. So we'll talk about a few more of these as we go, but I'll just call out that the Front and Main two-way conversion is a project, for example, that is included in this scenario as well. So again, a focus on closing gaps and completing investments with a little bit more of an inward look. And then our third scenario is one that really pulls in a lot of the projects that scored the highest on our equity criteria. So we looked at projects that scored really high in that direction and also projects that are in the Invest Health neighborhoods. And just as a reminder, those are three areas where Missoula is making significant investments to try and improve health outcomes and address the social determinants of health. Those include Franklin to the Fort, North Side, West Side, and River Road. And so part of what we tried to think about in this scenario are ways that we can really provide more affordable transportation options for people. So more options for walking, biking, and taking the bus, and connecting people to jobs and key opportunities. So this scenario includes a lot of neighborhood greenways. It also includes some really important connections like the Howard Razor Drive connection and the Highway 200 complete street. So those are just a few quick examples, and then we thought it would be more useful for this board to be able to take a closer look at each of the urban redevelopment districts. So Aaron, let me turn it back over to you to talk about each of these.
Yeah, and we can walk through these. I just want to highlight some of the trade-offs between those scenarios and the kinds of projects that we have in this plan, and hope that stimulates some discussion from this board on how we might think about integrating your priorities into the transportation plan. So starting with the North Reserve, Scott Street, URD, there's a lot of activity happening here and growing interest in this area. And so we did spend some time thinking about, one, what projects are in that area's master plan and how they fit in with the transportation plan. So some examples are the shared use path connecting from the north side to Grant Creek along the base of the interstate. As a key multimodal connection, there's the extension of Howard Razor Drive through this URD, connecting North Reserve to the north side, again, creating some of that fully multimodal, vehicle, bike, pedestrian connectivity that we know we need. There's a complete street project that's more of a retrofit of old Grant Creek Road and Cemetery Road. There's currently a city project that's sort of looking at the feasibility of that and what kinds of improvements can happen there. And then we have that, as Jennifer mentioned, that much bigger project of connecting Russell up to the interstate, or we even have an alternative that is connecting England Boulevard across the railroad as sort of a comparable projects that probably have similar costs, but maybe do it in slightly different ways. And so depending on, we tried to look at areas like this in a different way in each scenario. So are we doing those retrofits, complete streets, or are we creating the new connections across the railroad, or more of a mix with doing the Howard Razor connection through North Reserve? So that some examples of key projects in that area. We also have projects like a complete street or shared use paths along Scott Street, some of those more retrofit improvements in this area. So then downtown, there's a couple of URDs there, and a lot of projects. Again, we tried to draw from existing plans. So taking the recently completed downtown master plan, looking at what projects were in there and including them. A couple of things to note are the Higgins corridor, that we're calling that a committed project because the city has committed some funds at least to start a design process that will hopefully be kicking off here shortly, but also starting to think about dedicating funds to future investments sometime in the next 5 years or within the lifespan of the city's CIP. But then there's also the front main conversion is a project that has been sort of in our plans and in the downtown master plan for quite a while as one of those retrofit projects or enhancing connections. Or there's the Broadway corridor is another big one that I think is going to see a lot of interest both in the downtown and in URD2, sort of on the west end of Broadway. So some key choices there to make, knowing that maybe we can't do all of those, but we can start to address that, and also looking kind of at the riverfront and the downtown parks and trails master plan and some of the projects that we tried to integrate those as well in a variety of different ways. So a lot of projects in the downtown core that we could look to fund, but again, we probably can't do all of them. So then URD2 in the Sawmill District, again, this is an area where it overlaps a little bit with downtown. You have the Broadway corridor, complete street that is going to, as that area continues to redevelop, is going to be really key. What's not showing on this is that we have a committed project in the Russell Street project that's currently underway, or the first phase is complete and we're starting design on the next phase is going to include some work along Broadway around the North Russell intersection. And so that would tie into other complete street improvements connecting further into downtown. But that's an area really to focus on, knowing that there's some real redevelopment and activity going on there. California Street is another one that was a really high priority in the city's CIP process. It forms some really key connections. There's one section here from 3rd down to Dakota. I think just may not be showing the rest, but the city's CIP includes California essentially all the way to River Road. And so that's another priority project that could have some real benefits in that area. And then thinking about the Bitterroot Trail in terms of connecting it to downtown, either via a bridge at McCormick Park, which would be a new structure, or thinking about the opportunities to utilize the existing railroad bridge as maybe a cheaper, more efficient, enhancing that connection. So that kind of highlights on URD2. And in URD3, obviously there's a lot going on. One thing you'll note is that in every scenario, we have the Brooks Corridor as a project included, knowing that that's a really high priority. It's moving forward. It's part of Mountain Line's long-term strategic plan, and has a huge benefit under all of these scenarios. But then there are a number of other smaller projects that I wanted to highlight, including the Kent Central Neighborhood Greenway. Neighborhood greenways are something you'll see a lot in this plan, is really efficient ways to connect the non-motorized network through some strategic intersection improvements and then traffic calming along those neighborhood streets. And so that one provides east-west connectivity that you really don't see in this area in a really cost-effective way. And then we have some complete street projects on Russell that there's some challenges there with right-of-way or design of that road, but could have some real connectivity potential. And then another example is just connecting Johnson Street through Southgate Mall. So creating more of that network connectivity in an area that has some challenges. I think that's the URDs that we have.
Great. So I'll just wrap up by talking for a second about how we are comparing the performance of these scenarios against one another, and then we'll open it up for some questions before we talk about our next steps. So Aaron mentioned the 5 goals at the beginning, and nested under each of these goals, we have a handful of different objectives or outcomes. And this slide just summarizes a few of the outcomes that we have used to evaluate the 3 different scenarios. One of the things that I think is important and that we strove to do as we developed these 3 scenarios was to ensure that there's not one that's a bad scenario. They all are multimodal. They all are using projects that are in line with the region's goals, that are in line with previous planning efforts. And so they all move the region toward the goals that have been set. So that's a good thing. However, they do it in different ways. And a couple quick examples that I'll give of that. One of them is around the ways that we look at connectivity. So just as an example, the new connections scenario, where we are really creating some of those new complete streets, does a lot for multimodal connectivity, especially if we think about freight connectivity to some of the region's key commercial corridors. Enhanced connections, on the other hand, does a lot more for bike connectivity. And it really is a scenario that increases the amount of the bicycle network that is low stress or appropriate for people of all ages and abilities. And so it also does a lot for multimodal connectivity, but it really is a way to think about the scenarios doing well, but just doing things slightly differently. The other thing that I'll mention, and this really ties to the growth scenarios that we shared with you as well, is that across all 3 of these transportation scenarios, they perform better when we look at strategic growth. So when we're thinking about that inward growth and putting more people in the heart of the region, putting more people closer to jobs, to schools, to services, each of the transportation scenarios does better against all of these metrics. And so we really think about that strategic growth scenario and the growth opportunities as amplifiers for what the transportation investments might do for the region. That is true, again, across all of these when we look at metrics like the vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, and walking, biking, and transit trips, knowing that the region has really ambitious goals toward getting more people walking, biking, and taking transit and fewer people driving for every trip. It's interesting to see that the strategic growth scenario helps to do more of that. And again, each of the 3 transportation scenarios move the needle in the right direction, but just do it in slightly different ways. New connections reduces greenhouse gas emissions a little bit more because of a few key projects, like that Russell Street extension to I-90. All the scenarios reduce vehicle miles traveled. Regional equity does the most in terms of shifting people to walking, biking, and transit trips. So those are just a few quick examples of some of the analyses and metrics that we used as we looked at the 3 scenarios. And so part of what we'd really love to hear from the board today, we're curious about, your initial reactions to the scenarios. It's a lot of information, but I think most importantly, we're curious to think with you all about the ways that these scenarios and the projects that we've identified align with the priorities in the 4 districts. We really want to make sure that we've captured what is most important and make sure that we're not missing any projects. So we can pause there for some questions and discussion, and then we can talk about next steps from there, if that makes sense.
Questions? Board members? I didn't, yeah, Melanie.
I'll talk, Chairman. I don't have questions as much as thank you. It's so exciting to see all of the pieces of all the projects we've been talking about and all the investments all come together in these long-range plans. It's so exciting to see all the different pieces in the various urban renewal districts on your slides. I just want to throw out, because I love to throw it out almost every meeting, the conversion of Front and Main being such a major priority in my brain, as is the Brooks Corridor work, as is Russell Street, Broadway. Everything you talk about is so important, but I would love to see Front and Main conversion happen in my lifetime, as we've invested so much on big projects on those streets. And as those additional hotels come online and there's even more foot and car traffic, it's just going to be so important to keep people safe downtown, to get those streets up to 2020 plus multimodal transportation design standards. But thank you so much for this work. It's so exciting. And it's just a question. Did you do all of this yourself, or is there a consulting firm? Like, this is so professionally put together and fabulous.
Yeah, yes. As much as I'd like to say that we could do all of this quality in-house, no, we've relied really heavily. Nelson Nygaard, so Jennifer.
Nelson Nygaard, you did say that.
Nygaard is our
Yep. They
consultant,
do such
yes.
a great job, but you can tell your work guided it as well. So thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Yes, Ruth.
Also, just a comment that how important transportation is to making housing affordable for people. And I appreciate that you're looking at that, because we do have a commitment to invest in affordable housing. And so keeping that in mind as you're developing priorities would help us, Aaron, as funders of any of these projects. And while I'm certainly interested in what happens at the Brooks Corridor, because I know that could be critical to developing inward, I'm glad that you mentioned something about Scott Street, because I think that's going to be getting a lot more pressure with the housing developments that are already planned in that area. So again, I thank you for the work that you've done here, and just wanted to throw those out there in terms when you're prioritizing.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, I might take this opportunity to hop off. I think I'm probably running as late as I can be for my next meeting.
Well, thank you, Aaron, for, sorry we held you up.
No worries.
Aaron.
This is great conversation, and excited to hear more about what you have to say as we move through this plan. And I can let Jennifer sort of wrap it up with our next steps. And feel free to reach out at any point if you want to talk through any more of these areas, or as you have thoughts about the plan.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yep,
Thanks very much, Aaron.
Yep, bye.
Chris, did you have something you wanted to say?
Just a quick comment that in the North Missouri Scott Street Master Plan, you might recall some of the conversations that were had with the cemetery board, and as well as some neighborhoods regarding use of Russell Street to cross the railroad. And in the master plan, we actually de-emphasized that and looked at, did some extra traffic modeling on moving that toward the other recommended section or crossing that Aaron just mentioned. So be aware that coming through our board, if it ends up in us being associated with it, but there may be more comments and conversations coming your way because of that one.
Great. Thank you for flagging that. And there are a few of those projects that we left a couple of options in just because decisions hadn't been made by the board that would make them, but it's a good one to flag.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Anybody else?
Well, Carl, I can just quickly share next steps then if that, or go ahead. I'm
Sure,
sorry. Did you?
that'd be great. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Yeah, of course. Let me just jump back to this screen really quickly so that I can give everybody a web link, which is included on here. So over the course of the month of December so far, the MPO team and our team have been engaging with the community at a host of different meetings. We've hosted 5 different neighborhood-focused meetings, with the last one being tonight, and folks can connect to those opportunities through our website, and then have also been meeting with a handful of boards and different community groups as well. So we do have a short survey that walks people through the 3 scenarios and asks for impressions, the types of projects that are most important. You can find that on the MPO's website at MissoulaMPO.com, and we have until just after the new year for that. We also have an interactive map available. You can link to it from the website as well, that provides an opportunity to really dig into the scenarios and the specific projects in a little bit more detail for folks who are interested. And then as we head into 2021, we'll be continuing through this evaluation process, and we hope by the end of January to have an early draft of a recommended scenario. We're also going to be working on programs and policies, because we all know that transportation investments are critical, but we often need policy supports and we need non-infrastructure improvements to really make those work. So that'll be a big focus in early 2021, and then we'll move into an implementation plan and a draft for public review by the end of the first quarter, and hoping for adoption around April. So certainly the opportunity to engage with this board again as we start to have a recommended list of projects would be great. So that's what we have coming up next, and wish you all happy holidays.
Well, thank you. The same to you. If you need to find us, you know where we are.
Excellent.
So thank you for your good work.
Thank you. Thank you all for the time today.
All right, Jennifer, thank you.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Is that PowerPoint available? The PowerPoint you just gave us, is that available somewhere?
I will make sure that Aaron sends it if he hasn't, but yes, we'll make that available for you.
Okay. Really great presentation. Impressive.
Thank you.
Okay. I should have asked this before. Sorry, Tasha. Anything else from anybody before we move on? All right, Jennifer, thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, Ellen, director's report.
Yeah, I apologize for not having a written director's report, but I'll just do a quick verbal. I think we about got all the signatures on the contracts for the West Broadway planning effort that we're getting ready to embark on. So probably shortly after the first of the year, you'll see some activity around that. Spider continues working on the communications plan. I think she's, it's my understanding she's in the process of or already has interviewed board members. So if you all haven't been interviewed, maybe she hadn't gotten around to it yet. I know she's had some family issues that are health related that she's had to attend to. So it really has impacted this project a bit in terms of timing. The Scott Street project that we talked about a little bit at the last meeting, on the 9+ acres of the property that we purchased for the city from Scott Street Partners, has taken a little bit of a detour, but is still active and being worked on. And we'll probably be bringing some things to you after the first of the year relative to the redevelopment of that almost 10 acres. And I continue to spend a fair amount of my time on the development services, regulatory activities in the city. That's gotten it's becoming less time consuming and easier as they've staffed up, and we're getting through a lot of the reviews and permitting that needs to be done. It's complicated, and it's but we're making good progress, and I think this realignment is going to make a big difference in terms of the city's ability to process projects and permits efficiently and quickly. Those lead to product on the ground, and we all know we need product on the ground right now, particularly with respect to housing. And you know, after a fairly long hiatus of any new subdivisions coming in, they're just lining up at the doorway right now because of the demand for housing. That said, I'm managing to kind of balance between being in what seems like endless Zoom meetings all week long. I'm managing to balance the work that needs to be done for the agency, and I don't think that we're seeing any slippage here.
Where are they in the process of hiring a director?
They've narrowed, well, they've got a director. The director is Erin Pahan. She is in the process of hiring 2 deputy directors, one to look at community development, which includes implementation of the housing policy, the work that John Adams is doing with brownfields, Office of Neighborhoods is under that, you know, the community development block grant, all of that work that was part of the Office of Housing and Community Development. And then there's a deputy director that will be doing basically what I've been doing and dealing with current planning and the review and permitting responsibilities for the department. Both positions have been advertised. I think they have shortlisted, and I will probably be involved in some of the interview process for the regulatory position, but it's happening as we speak. I think that's where Erin had to get to, was a series of interviews probably for the community development wing of the division.
What's our target date on
As soon
when
as,
we get you back full time?
well, realistically, it's not going to happen until after the first of the year in all likelihood, but as soon as possible.
Okay.
And I encourage that daily.
Okay. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah,
Yes, Annette. Were you done, Ellen?
yeah, I'm fine.
Annette, did you have something you wanted to add?
Just to add to, I guess, tag on to the end of the director's report, I just wanted to make the full board aware that we, on the Brooks Corridor project, had a meeting with MDT Helena on December 2nd, I believe. And it was, I will say, it was an encouraging meeting. Of course, we didn't have no firm commitments, but some of the phrases that we heard from some of the MDT Helena staff were, this is really interesting, this is intriguing, we're pleased to see Missoula, you know, continuing to think outside the box. But of course, the devil is in the details. I think we were very well served to have HDR leading us, leading our team in this meeting and continuing to meet with MDT. So I just wanted to make the board aware of that. The next step is that MDT wants us to put together a sort of it's not a memorandum of understanding, but it's an agreement of how we're going to proceed with these conversations. And so HDR is assisting in putting that together. And of course, things might be slowed down just a little bit in Helena with the administration change as they kind of work through that. But we were really encouraged coming out of that meeting.
Good, thank you. Thank you. Okay, anything else, Ellen? On the director's report?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Budget reports? Anything remarkable?
Hi, this is Jill. I'm happy to go over the reports or just answer any questions depending on the board's leisure.
Well, I looked at them. I didn't have any big questions. Anybody? I don't know. I'm not, does anybody want Joe to go through them in more detail? Okay. We're good, Joe.
One quick comment. A couple of the districts look pretty anemic in terms of available funding.
Yes, they do.
if you'll really drill into the projects that have been approved, for instance, in District 2, you've got a $1.1 million budgeted project for the medical office building that's going up on the corner of Broadway and Maple. They're just now flying steel, so that project will not be reimbursed until FY22 sometime. So, there's more latitude than what it looks like in the bottom line numbers, because some of those are budgeted items that will not be expended this fiscal year. And that applies to several districts. When I looked at the numbers, I had sticker shock until I thought about it for a minute.
Okay. And are there things in the pipeline that we're going to be looking at after the first of the year?
Yes, sir. Always.
And what's that?
Always.
Yeah.
No, there'll be some projects that we have been approached about that will definitely come before the board.
Okay. All right. Okay. Any other questions or any other comments about the either the budget reports or the activity reports? Seeing none. Happy holidays to you all.
Happy holidays.
And be safe. And
a happy new year.
And a happy new year, right? The second to the last slide that we were showing on the transportation plan said something about tired of 2020, think 2050. And my response was yes, but 2050, that's a little taxing right now, but but yes, so we'll see you all in what has got to be a much better new year. And
Amen.
happy holidays to you all.
Amen.
All right.
Thank you very much. Happy holidays. Goodbye.
Thank
Hey,
you.
y'all.
Bye-bye.
Maybe next year we can share Christmas treats around a table.
Well, I'm planning on it, and I want twice as much homemade candy. All right. Bye all.
Thanks.